Imagine making a movie for around $750,000 and then, just a few months later, watching it make hundreds of millions of dollars. Sounds like a Hollywood fairy tale, right? Well, that's exactly what happened with Obsession, Curry Barker's film starring Indy Navarrete and Michael Johnston. But today, I don't want to talk about whether Obsession is a good movie or a bad movie. What interests me is something much more complicated. I think its success is a perfect example of how important luck can be in the film industry. Not luck instead of talent, not luck instead of a good script, and not luck instead of good marketing, but luck working together with all of those things. Because when we look at a successful movie after the fact, we tend to think, of course it became a hit. Look at how well everything was planned. But there's a problem with that. We already know the ending. We know Obsession became a huge success. The filmmakers didn't know that when they were making it. And that's exactly what makes the story of Obsession so interesting. The concept itself is incredibly simple. Bear is in love with Nikki, but he's not sure she feels the same way about him. Then he uses a mysterious object to make a wish. He wants Nikki to love him, and the wish actually comes true. The problem is that Nikki's love slowly turns into complete obsession, and from a marketing perspective, that's almost a perfect concept. You don't need 5 minutes to explain the plot. You can tell someone it's about a guy who magically makes his crush fall in love with him, but she becomes so obsessed with him that he starts regretting his own wish. That's it. You immediately want to know what happens next. But here's the first important thing. The concept itself isn't completely original. Stories about obsession, stalkers, unhealthy love, magical wishes, and people getting exactly what they wanted only to discover that it's actually a nightmare have existed for decades. So I don't think Obsession became successful simply because it had an idea nobody had ever seen before. Its strength is in the way familiar ideas were combined and executed. And that's where Curry Barker becomes extremely important. Before Obsession, Barker was primarily known as an internet creator. He understood YouTube, short-form content, horror, comedy, and most importantly, he understood what makes someone stop scrolling and pay attention. That's an incredibly valuable skill in modern filmmaking, because today, a movie isn't always sold through a 2-minute trailer. Sometimes it's sold through one short clip, a moment someone posts on TikTok, a reaction video, a meme, or simply a friend saying, "You have to watch this." And Obsession is almost perfectly designed for that environment. At the center of the movie is Indy Navarrete, and her character Nikki gradually transforms from the object of Bear's affection into something genuinely terrifying. Navarrete has to take the character through that transformation while still making us understand her and fear her at the same time. And this is where we can't simply say everything happened because of luck. Good acting is talent. Good directing is talent. A good concept is the result of creative work. But then comes the part that nobody can completely control. You can make a great movie, but you don't know if one particular scene is going to go viral. You don't know if the exact audience you need is going to discover it. You don't know whether people will recommend it to their friends. And you don't know whether your movie will arrive at exactly the right moment. And Obsession seems to have arrived at the right moment. That's important. The movie appeared at a time when audiences were showing a strong appetite for original horror with unusual concepts. It's not another superhero movie, not another giant sequel, and not another remake. It's a relatively small movie built around a strange, easy to understand idea. And then comes the most important part, word of mouth. One person watches the movie and tells another person, "You have to see this." That person goes to the theater and tells someone else. Someone posts a reaction on TikTok. Someone discusses the ending on YouTube. Someone avoids spoilers and tells their friends, "Just watch it. I won't tell you anything." Suddenly, the audience is marketing the movie for free. And that's one of the most powerful things that can happen to a movie. Because when a studio says, "Watch our new movie, it's amazing," you know they're trying to sell you something. But when your friend says, "I watched Obsession last night," and you have no idea what happens, that's completely different. And now we get to the biggest question: why don't other movies become Obsession? There are thousands of low-budget horror movies. There are talented filmmakers. There are great actors. There are crazy concepts. There are movies that cost even less. But most of them simply disappear. This is where survivorship bias comes in. We see one movie become a massive hit, and then we start looking for the formula. This is what you need: a small budget, an original idea, internet marketing, a good actor, and you'll get the next Obsession. But we forget about the hundreds of movies that did similar things and nobody noticed. That's why I wouldn't say Obsession became successful just because of luck. That would be too simple. Barker had to make a good movie. Navarrete had to deliver a strong central performance. The concept had to work. Focus Features had to see potential in the film. The marketing had to present it in the right way. But even after all of that, there was still a huge amount of uncertainty. Nobody could plan for audiences suddenly deciding everyone needs to see this movie. And I think that's where the difference between a successful movie and a phenomenon begins. A successful movie can simply be well made, but a phenomenon is something different. It's when the movie starts existing beyond its creators, when the audience starts talking about it on its own, when the story of the movie's success becomes part of the movie's marketing. And that's what happened with Obsession. First, it was a small horror movie. Then it became a movie with an unusual concept. Then it became a movie with massive word of mouth. And eventually, its own success became the story. A $750,000 movie is making hundreds of millions. Now someone isn't going to see Obsession only because they liked the trailer. They're going because they want to understand, what is this movie that everyone suddenly seems to be talking about? And that's when you get the feedback loop. The movie creates interest. Interest brings audiences. Audiences create discussion. Discussion brings more audiences. More audiences create even more discussion. And sometimes all of that starts with one person simply loving the movie. So here's my main takeaway. Obsession doesn't prove that talent doesn't matter. Quite the opposite. Without talent, the movie might never have gotten its opportunity in the first place. But talent is only one part of the equation. You can write an incredible script, make a great movie, and still be ignored. Or you can make a genuinely good movie, arrive at exactly the right moment, find the right distributor, get the right audience reaction, and suddenly find yourself at the center of the conversation. And that's probably the most interesting thing about filmmaking. We like to think success is a reward for quality, but in reality, success is a combination of quality, marketing, timing, audience reaction, distribution, word of mouth, and a huge amount of randomness. Obsession simply found itself in a situation where a lot of those factors happened to work in its favor at the same time. So if I had to summarize the entire story in one sentence, it would be this. Talent creates the opportunity. A good movie keeps people watching, but sometimes luck is what turns all of that into a phenomenon. And maybe that's why the story of Obsession is much more interesting than simply being another successful horror movie. Because it shows us something Hollywood doesn't always like to admit. Sometimes you can do everything right and still lose, and sometimes you do everything right and the world somehow answers. Today is your day, and Obsession was one of those rare movies that got incredibly lucky.